And good morning. This is Mr. Melendez, and I am bringing to you a read aloud of the Newsela article Famous Speeches Eli Wiesel, The Perils of Indifference. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and I'm also going to perform the read aloud of the editor's note and then go into the actual article itself. This article is pretty long, so the video might take a little bit longer than usual. I just want to make sure that I hit all the highlights. There's certain words here that can be a little bit difficult to pronounce, so please bear with me as we go through the entire article. Editor's note. On April 12, 1999, Eli Wiesel gave the following powerful speech. Wiesel is a Nobel Prize winner and wrote the book Night. The book is about Wiesel's experience in the Holocaust. His speech was part of the Millennium Lecture Series, which President Bill Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton hosted. It was organized to show off inventive new views and creativity in American life. In his speech, Wiesel discusses his childhood. He talks about the hard times he faced. He warns about the dangers of ignoring problems like this at the beginning of a new century. Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, members of Congress, Ambassador Holbrooke, Excellencies, friends. 54 years ago to the day, a young Jewish boy from a small town in the Carpathian Mountains woke up. He was not far from a place where the writer Goethe loved called Vermeer. He was in a place known for its evil, called Buchenwald. He was finally free, but there was no joy in his heart. He thought there never would be again. Liberated a day earlier by American soldiers, he remembers their rage at what they saw. And even if he lives to be a very old man, he will always be grateful to them for that rage. He will be grateful for their kindness. He did not understand their language. Their eyes told him what he needed to know, though. They too would remember and bear witness. And now, I stand before you, Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the Army that freed me, and tens of thousands of others. I am filled with a deep and lasting gratitude to the American people. Gratitude is a word that I hold dear. Gratitude is what makes a person human. And I am grateful to you, Hillary, or Mrs. Clinton, or what she said. I am grateful for what you are doing for children in the world. I am grateful for what you do for the homeless, for those who suffer from injustice, those who suffer from poor luck and society. And I thank all of you for being here. We are approaching the year 2000. We are bringing in a new millennium. What will be left of the past 100 years? How will it be remembered in the next 1,000 years? Surely it will be judged. It will be judged harshly in several ways. These failures have cast a dark shadow over humanity. There have been 2 world wars and countless civil wars. There has been a senseless chain of leaders being murdered. Gandhi, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, the President of Egypt, the Prime Minister of Israel. There have been bloodbaths in Cambodia and Algeria, India and Pakistan, Ireland and Rwanda, Eritrea and Ethiopia, Sarajevo and Kosovo. There has been inhumanity in the Russian labor camps. There was the awful tragedy of Hiroshima, and on a different level, of course, Auschwitz and Treblinka. There have been so much violence. There has been so much indifference. What is indifference? The word means no difference. It is a strange and unnatural state. It blurs the line between light and darkness. It blurs the line between morning and light, crime and punishment, cruelty and goodness, good and evil. What are its courses and inescapable results? Is it a way of thinking? Can indifference be a way of thinking? Can one possibly view indifference as a morally good thing? Is it necessary at times to practice it simply to stay calm? Must you do it to live normally? Is it the way to enjoy a fine meal and a glass of wine, as the world around us experiences terrible violence and problems? Of course, indifference can be tempting. More than that, it can be inviting. It is so much easier to look away from people who suffer. It is so much easier to avoid such rude interruptions to our work, our dreams, our hopes. It is, after all, awkward and troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and loss of hope. Yet, for the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor is not important, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Whether you can see their plan or they hide it, it is of no interest. Indifference makes the other person into just an idea. Over there, behind the black gates of Auschwitz, the most tragic of all prisoners were called the Muselmaner. Wrapped in their torn blankets, they would sit or lie on the ground. They stared into space blankly. They did not know who or where they were. They were strangers to their surroundings. They no longer felt pain, hunger, thirst. They feared nothing. They felt nothing. They were dead and did not know it. Rooted in our tradition, some of us felt that to be abandoned by humanity, that was not the worst thing. We felt that to be abandoned by God was worse than to be punished by Him. Better an unfair God than an indifferent one. For us to be ignored by God was a harsher punishment than to be a victim of His anger. Men can live far from God. He cannot live outside of God. God is everywhere. God is wherever we are, even in suffering, even in suffering. In a way, to be indifferent to the suffering is what makes humans being inhuman. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger and hatred. Anger can at times be creative. One can write a great poem or a song. One does something special for the sake of humanity because one is angry at the injustice that one witnesses. But indifference is never creative. You may even at times respond to hatred. You fight it. You publicly criticize it. You make it harmless. Indifference brings out no response. Indifference is not a response. Indifference is not a beginning. It is an end. And therefore, indifference is always the friend of the enemy. It helps the aggressor. It never helps his victim. The victim's pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. Think of the political prisoner in his cell. Think of the hungry children and the homeless refugees. Not to respond to their terrible condition, not to relieve their loneliness by offering them a spark of hope, is to send them away from human memory. And in denying their humanity, we betray our own. Indifference, then, is not only a sin, it is a punishment. And this is one of the most important lessons of this outgoing 100 years wide-ranging experiments in good and evil. In the place that I come from, society was composed of three simple groups. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. During the darkest of times, inside the ghettos and death camps, we felt abandoned, forgotten. All of us did. I'm glad that Mrs. Clinton mentioned that we are now remembering that event, that period. We are now in the days of remembrance. And our only miserable comfort was that we believed that Auschwitz and Treblinka were closely kept secrets. We believed that leaders of countries did not know what was going on behind those black gates and barbed wires. We thought that they had no knowledge of the war against the Jews that Hitler's armies and their helpers waged as part of a war against the Allies. If they knew, we thought, surely those leaders would have moved heaven and earth to get involved. They would have spoken out with great anger and strong beliefs. They would have bombed the railways leading to Birkenau. they would have at least bombed the railways just once. And now we know. We discovered that the United States' top government groups knew. The State Department knew. There was a highly respected American president then. He was a great leader. And I say it with some sadness and pain because today is exactly 54 years marking his death. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died April the 12th, 1945. So he is very much present to me and to us. No doubt he was a great leader. He got the American people and the world to fight. He sent them into battle. He brought hundreds and thousands of brave soldiers from America. He brought them to fight dangerous ideas, to fight Hitler. And so many of the young people fell in battle. And even still, I must say that his image in Jewish history is flawed. The depressing tale of a ship called the St. Louis is an example of why this is the case. 60 years ago, the ship was sailing to the U.S. from Nazi Germany. When they got there, the passengers on the ship, nearly 1,000 Jews, were sent back. And that happened after the Kristallnacht. The night was the first wave of violence against Jews in Germany. Hundreds of Jewish shops were destroyed. Synagogues were burned. Thousands of people were put into concentration camps. And that ship, which was already on the coast of the United States, was sent back. I don't understand. Roosevelt was a good man with a heart. He understood those who needed help. Why didn't he allow these refugees to come to shore? 1,000 people had come to America. It is the great country, the greatest democracy, the most generous of all new nations in modern history. What happened? I don't understand. Why the indifference on the highest level to the suffering of the victims? But then, there were people who cared about our tragedy. Those non-Jews, those Christians we called the righteous Gentiles. Their selfless act of heroism saved the honor of their faith. Why were there so few of them? Why was there a greater effort to save Nazi murderers after the war than to save their victims during the war? Why did some of America's biggest companies continue to do business with Hitler's Germany until 1942? It has been said that Nazi armies could not have invaded France without the oil they got from American businesses. This fact has been written about. How is one to explain their indifference? And yet, my friends, good things have also happened in this painful century. There was the defeat of Nazism and the collapse of communism. There was the rebirth of Israel and its ancestral land. There was the death of apartheid in South America, Israel peace treaty with Egypt, and the peace agreement in Ireland. And let us remember the meeting filled with drama and emotion between Israel and Egypt that you, Mr. President, held in this very place. I was here and I will never forget it. And then, of course, there was the decision the United States and NATO made together to send help to Kosovo and save those victims. Those refugees were forced away from their homes by a man. I believe that this man should be charged with crimes against humanity. But this time, the world was not silent. This time, we do answer. This time, we got involved. Does it mean that we have learned from the past? Does it mean that people have changed? Has the human being become less indifferent and more human? Have we really learned from our experiences? Are we more sensitive to the pain of victims of ethnic cleansing and other forms of injustices in places near and far? Is today's justified intervention in Kosovo, led by you, Mr. President, a lasting warning? Does it say that never again will the deportation, the terrorization of children and their parents be allowed anywhere in the world? Will it stop other strict oppressors in other lands from doing these things? What about the children? Oh, we see them on television. We read about them in the papers, and we do so with a broken heart. Their fate is always the most tragic. How can it not be? When adults make war, children die. We see their faces, their eyes. Do we hear their cries? Do we feel their pain, their agony? Every minute, one of them dies of disease, violence, hunger. Some of them, so many of them, could be saved. And so, once again, I think of the young Jewish boy from the Carpathian Mountains. He stayed with the old man I have become throughout the years of search and struggle, and together we walked towards the new millennium, carried deeply felt fear and extraordinary hope. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the Read Aloud. As you scroll down, there are going to be questions that you're going to have to answer. Make sure that you complete those questions as best to your ability. And if anything, please refer back to the reading or this read aloud to help you with answering your questions. This is Mr. Melendez, and I am punching out. Have a good day.